This is Booked on Rock. I'm Eric Senich. Our guests, photographer Bill Zygmant and Beatles historian David Bedford, authors of Where Did You Get That Shirt? Renowned British photographer Bill Zygmant and Beatles historian and author David Bedford have released a new book entitled Where Did You Get That Shirt?, featuring 3 decades worth of Zygmant's film and rock photos. Zygmant's Beatles photos are considered so important that the Hard Day's Night Hotel in Liverpool displays them within a suite named after him. This brand new book, designed by artist Paul Skellett, contains over 200 original photos taken by Zygmant, including 60 of the Beatles, as well as John Lennon and Yoko Ono, plus the first photos of Jimi Hendrix with the Experience in London, and many that have never been published before. Also included are shots of music legends such as the Rolling Stones, the Bee Gees, Mary Hopkin, Marc Bolan, Suzi Quatro, Madness, Bananarama, and more. Bill Zygmant's passion for photography started at an early age, seeing press photographers on newsreels photographing film stars. He began his career at the London Star before going on to work at the News Chronicle in Fleet Street, first on the picture desk and then in the darkroom. In 1966, he went freelance, photographing music and show business stars, with his work being regularly published in the Musical Express, Billboard, Picture Post, as well as British national newspapers and magazines. He's since worked as picture editor and a lecturer on film and television production. David Bedford trained as a biologist and was a scientific researcher until his love of reading, then writing, set him along the path to become an author. David has had 85 books traditionally published, which have been translated worldwide in 35 languages. They include the much-loved best-selling picture book, Big Bear, Little Bear, and the team series of football fiction for juniors. He's taught creativity, literacy, and author techniques in schools around the world for 10 years, and now combines his writing and teaching in his new personal publishing venture, Me and You Books, where readers write. To hear a playlist of the music discussed in this episode, just head over to the show notes page. Bill and David, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's great to talk to you both.
It's good to be here, Eric. Thank you so much for inviting us on.
Oh, absolutely. And this is a beautiful book, some amazing photos in this, but not just photos, some great stories too. So before we get to this, I want to ask you guys how you came together to do this book. David, as you write, this is one of those small world stories.
Yeah, it was strange. I got this Facebook message from Bill, which just said, I want to talk to you about a book. Now, I'd been to one of Bill's exhibitions in Liverpool, so I knew who he was and his photos. So we got in touch, and I said, any particular reason you got in touch with me? And it turned out we have a mutual friend in David Kirkwood. My dad was a vicar in the Dingle in Liverpool, where Ringo's from, and his successor was David Kirkwood. Now, he'd retired, and we still keep in touch. And it turns out that David and Sylvia knew Bill many, many years ago when they were first starting courting. So David was the connection between the two of us. And it's one of my dad's phrases was always, it's a small world. And it's David Kirkwood had recommended that Bill got in touch with me. So amazing.
Bill, I have to imagine you're happy with how this book came out.
Well, the book I quite like because it portrays pop in the 60s and 70s. This is what I wanted to do because, it was probably a magic era and all the big stars were still going around still.
You're right, and especially now we're losing all of these great musicians. It's great to look back at a time when they were alive and well and you capture it all. I don't want to leave out Paul Skellett because he designed this book. He did an amazing job. Can you talk about Paul and his contributions to the book?
Well, Paul's been a friend of mine for a number of years. We met up when I was working as the historian and consultant and associate producer on a documentary called Looking for Lennon, which is all about John Lennon's formative years. And Paul's really good at designer, graphic artist. And what he was able to do for that documentary was take some of the childhood photographs of John and his family, and he was able to animate them, slightly bring them to life. He did some amazing stuff. We then worked on a book together that I'd done called Finding the Fourth Beatle, which was all about all the Beatles drummers. And Paul had designed the whole book. So when Bill said to me, he didn't just want a book of photos where, you pick it up, you look through, and there's some photos, and that was it. He wanted it to be more than that. And so I said to him, well, I'll tell you what, because you can remember so many of the stories, you tell me the stories behind the photos so you get the context. I can add some other bit of historical context if needed. But then I said, my friend Paul is an amazing designer. He'll take the period and he'll bring it to life. And that's exactly what he did. Paul is a genius. He sees things which I haven't met anybody else who sees things as he does. And he just brings them to life and frames the photos, which are fantastic photos in themselves. And it just brings them further leaping out the page. Paul's a genius for that. He really is.
The photos remind me a lot of this Disney Plus documentary that just came out on the Beatles Get Back sessions. Have you had a chance to see this?
Yes.
It feels like these photos, looking at them, it's like it's happening right now. You're looking at them and they're crystal clear, and it takes you really up close. Looking at a photo right off the bat here of George Harrison where he's got one of the blue meanies, the blue hands on his shoulder, and he's got that little smirk on his face, but it feels like it's happening right now.
And that is credit to Bill. And it's probably worth Bill explain how he staged photos. He didn't just try and do a headshot, take a picture of somebody, and that was that.
That was actually where I was going to go with that, David, was I wanted to ask you, Bill, about something that you did talk about early on in the book, was your approach to taking photographs of musicians and bands for magazines, because the record companies at that time just took simple headshots. Magazines were looking for something different, had to be more interesting. Can you talk about how you went about achieving that goal to make it more interesting than just the average headshot?
I didn't see myself just as a photographer. I saw it as myself as a communicator. So when I went into any personality, I would talk and I would make them feel very important because I would know something about them. Because before I went to photograph anybody, I would do research. I had access to a lot of newspaper libraries. So I could go into the library and look up what they've been doing, what they like, what they dislike. And I could also look what I thought they looked the best at, like their poses and so forth. So before I even started to lift the camera up, I'll get friendly with them. And quite often, I would go and put my arms around them and say, lovely to meet you.
Well, let's talk about one of those stars that you took photos of, Jimi Hendrix. These are the first photos of Jimi with his bandmates in The Experience, Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell, in London. What do you remember about that day?
With Jimi Hendrix, that was special because I was going to photograph him on a Monday. And when I got there, he was a bit out of his mind, And the publicity people said, sorry, Bill, no photograph. And I was quite upset about it. So in a nice way, I stormed off. On the Tuesday morning, they rang me and they said, Jimi would like you to come at 2:00 today and you can photograph him with his group and him together and he will give you a good half an hour. I nearly said, forget it, but I didn't. I went to see them. There was this place just off Oxford Street and I walked in the door and he was there and he stood up and we shook hands. Anyway, we sat down and started doing some arm wrestling together because he felt that I had a strong arm. So we arm wrestled for 2 or 3 minutes and then I took the pictures. And this is why you see the picture of him with his arm in the air. That's the story.
And this is where the title of the book comes from, correct? Where did you get that shirt?
Yeah, so Bill was taking iconic photos at a very, very important time. So the first ones of Jimi with The Experience, but when Bill turned up, they were wearing the same shirt. And the question, where did you get that shirt? So that's why we put that as the title for the book. We thought it created a bit of curiosity.
Oh, it sure did with me. I really was wondering where that came from, and then finally it hit me as I'm looking through the Hendrix photos. Yeah, great title. David, can you talk about how Jimi got the attention of the Beatles?
Yeah, this is one of those moments that Paul McCartney often talks about, that Sgt. Pepper had come out I would say that was on my birthday. I was only 2 at the time. So I came out on my second birthday. And the Beatles were going to see Jimmy perform. And Jimmy had listened to the album and he'd learnt to play some of the songs from the album that very same day. And I mean, we know that he was an absolute genius of the guitar. But in a way, that was such a tribute to the Beatles that they were so thrilled that this guy's just becoming a mega star, would spend most of the day learning to play something from their brand new album that had just come out.
And before I ask Bill about his experience taking those first ever photos of John and Yoko, David, if you could just set up this scene, because John and Yoko are at Apple Tailoring at 161 Kings Road in London. What was Apple Tailoring?
Part of Apple, which, as we know, became a bit of a disaster. It was a great idea. You know, the Beatles were generating so much income. They had to do something, otherwise, you know, they'd be paying it all in tax, which is why George wrote Taxman, you know, which is one of the funniest lyrics ever. Because if you're a real top earner at that time, you were paying 90 pence in the pound in tax. So it was a ridiculous amount of money. So the accountants were saying, you've got to invest this money in something. Otherwise, you're just going to give it all away. So they set up this company, Apple. The idea was there should be no barrier to anybody in the creative arts who wanted to perform, you know, their music, their poetry, whatever it was. And they took newspaper ads and said, please send us your tapes, send us everything. It was chaotic. They set up Apple this, that. The only bit that really worked was Apple Records, which signed some really good artists. Apart from that, they tried all sorts. And one of them was Apple Tailoring with hairdressers in the bottom as well, with Leslie Cavendish, who was the Beatles hairstylist.
Yes, which is a good segue over to Bill. This is, Bill, where you first met John and Yoko. Can you talk about this?
When I first met John, he was opening the John Crittle shop in King's Road. Now, strange enough, you know, I started to pose him. He said, how do you want me to pose? So I got him to do a model pose with his hands on his hips and everything. And he quite enjoyed that. And then I noticed there's this woman in the background I recognised, because I've done some work for her 3 or 4 years before that in London with Tony Cox, or Anthony Cox, who was her husband. And I sort of just waved to her. So she went and stood in the picture. Little did I know she was actually with John at the time. Of course, it turns out it's the first picture of them in public together. It was very magic for me. You know, I was very proud to have that.
Oh, absolutely.
It's quite an iconic photo of John doing like the model's pose. And I'd never heard an explanation as to why John was standing there with his hand on his hip doing this pose. And that's because Bill asked him to do that. And then, as he was saying, Yoko just positions herself in the back of the photo. That's the first time they're ever photographed together.
And Bill, you talked about how you see Yoko there and you recognize her. Were you happy to see her there with John?
Not at first, no, because I thought, what are you doing there? But, I mean, I could cut her out. She didn't bother me, really, because I could have cropped just John posing. So her in the background didn't matter. But I included it because it was a whole length of the shot. And I don't know, if you do things and you're not sure why you do them. And I think I had a feeling. I did have a feeling. Because I think John would have said, get out of the way, you know?
Right, you felt like he was going to say, get out of here. If you don't want Yoko in it, you're not getting me.
He was particular who he was photographed with, anyone. And not many people ever had private sessions with him. A lot of press dues, he didn't turn up because he didn't want his photograph taken with people. Like all the films they did, some of the press releases, he didn't turn up. If you've seen one of the photographs that you saw, there was a drawing of John in the background. And they did that because he didn't turn up to the reception. He was a man of his own beliefs, I think.
I just mentioned the Get Back sessions on Disney Plus, And one of the comments that Rolling Stone's Brian Hyatt made on his show, he has a podcast and a radio show, I think, on satellite radio. Anyway, he was saying that the camera just loved John Lennon. There was something about John. He had that certain something, just jumps out whenever he's in the room. What are your thoughts regarding John from a photographer's perspective? Was he that way? I mean, did he just jump out? Did the camera love him?
Yes. To me, I think John knew exactly what he looked like in pictures. And I think the way he posed and so forth, he had it all together. Even way he played and way he looked, that he knew I was taking the photograph. So he did put on a little bit more expression in his face, you know?
Your photo of the psychedelic Apple store, that really jumps off the page. David, I'll go to you. What is the psychedelic Apple store? How did it go from a can't not notice display of colors to plain white? What happened there?
Well, again, this is another part of the disaster that was Apple. So they were setting all these different bits up, and they thought, swinging 60s, Carnaby Street, everywhere, fashion was such a huge thing. London was about the most fashionable place in the world. And so they thought, well, let's have a boutique. And they sell, really expensive designer stuff. But it was the stuff that was on sale there was very, very expensive and not particularly popular. But he wants to draw attention because it's one of those things that the Beatles were able to do, which was marry music with art. Because John, of course, had gone through art college. Paul was very arty. He'd done art through school. George was very artistic as well. So they loved this idea of it's more than just the music. They had their image with the clothes. So they thought, yeah, well, that makes sense to have the Apple tailoring. It makes sense to have a boutique. But then it was the art. So they got this group from the Netherlands called The Fool. And they did this amazing mural on the side of the Apple boutique. And it's absolutely sensational. But, there's so many people around. It's different these days when there's art everywhere. But back then, you had to have planning permission to do something like that. So very quickly after it had gone up, the local authority said, you can't do that. You haven't got planning permission. You've got to cover it up. Thankfully for us, Bill was there to take the photo. So again, it's one of those that's been seen so many times, but he is the only guy who's got John's psychedelic RollsRoyce, the psychedelic caravan, and the Apple boutique for that short period of time before it had to get covered up. And it's one of those iconic images that has been seen. And thankfully, yet again, Bill was in the right place at the right time. So for that short period, the boutique was there. And of course, because people were just walking in and stealing clothes anyway.
Oh, really?
Because there's no security.
Oh, my
yeah.
God.
Again, it's like with most parts of Apple, they were hemorrhaging money. Nobody was paying attention. So in the end, they said, nobody's buying stuff. This is pointless. So they just said to around London, right, if you want something, come and get it. And literally, they opened the doors, people went in and just took whatever they want and cleaned the store out. And that was it. It was gone. So another Apple disaster, but thankfully, Bill captured that absolutely amazing image.
This is post-Brian Epstein, correct? This is after Brian had passed?
Yeah.
So is this indicative of that post-Brian Epstein era where a lot of these decisions, there's not a lot of structure there? Because that's something that Paul talks about in the Get Back sessions. When Brian died, we lost our father figure and that person who can keep everything in order for us. Is this kind of an example of that?
I think that's what Apple became. They come up with the concept. And I think if it had been managed properly, with Brian, with his assistant, Alistair Taylor, who I'd got to know, Brian's brother, Clive, again, really good business brains, very well organized, it could have worked. But because they were managerless, Paul, as it came up in Get Back, had said quite clearly, we will not have another manager. They needed somebody to sort it out. I think one of the very clever things that Peter Jackson did in the Get Back series was just every now and again, there's a little snippet that John's starting to meet with Alan Klein. Now, Alan Klein was the guy who was looking after the Rolling Stones. And as we found out years later, was terrible with money. He was quite good at siphoning it off. But John was talking to Klein. He was really convinced he was the guy, and this is what led to the split. John convinced George and Ringo Alan Klein was the guy to come in and fix Apple. Paul was convinced that his father-in-law from the Eastman family, he would be the right one. Entertainment lawyers, loads of experience. That's what sort of split them. So they've got this chaos of an organization out of control with nobody running it properly. And then you get Klein coming in and saying, well, yeah, this is a disaster, sacking loads of people. And it just crumbled. And I think that was one of those sad things for Brian. In the time leading up to his death, the Beatles had stopped touring in the August of '66. And that's one of the big things that Brian organised was the tours. He was starting to feel that he wasn't as important within the Beatles. And it's only after he died, I think everybody realised how important he was. And I think it would have been so different if Brian had lived.
This painting on the Apple Store, how would you describe this? I mean, it's got the yin and yang symbol there in the middle, all these big, beautiful colors. It's so late 60s. I don't know. How would you describe it to somebody who's never seen it before? It looks like an Indian woman with a headdress, I think, with all the planets
surrounding her. Well, that's what they were picking up. Because we're thinking, at that time, psychedelia was in. And psychedelia is all about these bright colors, all these things that were coming from, people doing LSD. And again, this is where the art is all getting mixed in there. They were getting involved with the Indian religion, with the Maharishi. There's all these different influences were coming out, and the world was changing very, very quickly. And you can sort of see the influence of art, the influence of drugs, the influence of music, all that coming together. And it's an amazing piece of art. It really is. And it's so sad that it had to be covered up, because it's typical of a lot of the art that you would see. This came onto album covers, etc. as well. It placed it right. There's your late 60s. It's there in time. Exactly when that could have been made.
And this is through George's wife, Patty, that this whole thing comes about, this team known as The Fool, right?
The Fool, yeah.
All four guys approve of this image?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They loved it. Because, again, the whole thing with Apple, it was about people with artistic skills expressing themselves. And this is one of those things that John always said, going back to school, it was great when he was at Dovedale Primary School up to the age of 11, because you're allowed to draw and paint and be really, really creative. But then when you get to high school, if you're really creative, like John was, they're not interested. They want to stick you in boxes, and they do science and maths. And that wasn't him. And it blocks the creativity. So one of the great things with Apple was, if you're artistic and you've not been allowed to express yourself, we want to help you achieve that for whatever realm that is in. So that's why they wanted something that was really expressive, really stand out, that would make a statement. That's what they were about. And as you say, it's a fantastic image. It's just a shame, because can you imagine that now? It's almost like when you go to Times Square, you get to see all the neon signs. That would be a tourist attraction. People would go just to look at this bit of art.
Bill, I want to go to you again. You first came upon this building when it was just being painted, the Psychedelic Apple Store. Can you take us back to that moment when you first come upon it? What was going through your mind?
When I was driving down Oxford Street, and I went up Baker Street, and I saw this building, and I parked in the middle of the road and got out and took it. And I thought, this is magic. And they didn't want me to take pictures, but I managed to take a few and get the whole building, and I took little parts of it because I thought they all meant something. And it's not until I got back and started to look into it, it's a John Lennon shop opening for the Beatles. Anyway, they didn't have permission to paint the building from the council. And before they could open it, they painted it. They had to whitewash it, which is a bit sad because it was a beautiful building. What I found now That's the only picture of the whole building in existence. Apple used it for some of their stories and brochures. It was just lucky. I had a feeling about it, and it just happened. It was just a shame because I went to the reception of the opening of the shop, and as you see, there's a picture, and everyone was a bit upset about it because it was very special. It was the Beatles. It was John Lennon. It was his style, everything. Since then, I have met someone who's lived in one of the flats there, and she remembers me taking them because she looked out of a window.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. All right, it's time to check out the new and upcoming Books on Rock releases. Just released this week through Unbound Books, Nothing But a Good Time by Justin Quirk. From 1983 until 1991, glam metal was the sound of American culture. This was the world stalked by hair metal bands like Bon Jovi, Kiss, Wasp, Skid Row, Dokken, Motley Crue, Cinderella, Rat, and many more. Where did glam metal come from? How did it spread? And why does nobody admit to having been a glam metaler anymore? Also released this week, Yes in the 1980s, Decades by Stephen Lamb with David Watkinson. With most authors concentrating on the group's 1970s career, Yes in the 1980s looks in forensic detail at this relatively under-examined era of the band's history, featuring rarely seen photos researched by author David Watkinson. The book follows the careers of all 9 significant members of the group during a turbulent decade which saw huge highs but also many lows. Also released this week through Sonic Bond Publishing, Radiohead, Every Album, Every Song by William Allen. This book examines each album and each peripheral song from singles, B-sides, and EPs with stories and analysis of every officially released track from arguably not only the most important rock group of the 1990s, but also the most significant post-rock group of the new century. Led Zeppelin, Every Album, Every Song by Steve Pilkington came out through Sonic Bond Publishing this week as well. This book digs into every Led Zeppelin track recorded during their decade-long existence before John Bonham's death brought down the curtain, by way of facts, anecdotes, analysis, and a small dose of humor here and there. Due out December 28th through Black Dog and Leventhal Books. David Bowie, All the Songs, The Story Behind Every Track by Benoit Claire. A lovingly thorough dissection of every album and every track ever released by David Bowie over the span of his nearly 50-year career. It follows the musician from his self-titled debut album, released in 1967, all the way through Black Star, his final album. This one-of-a-kind book draws upon years of research in order to recount how each song was written, composed, and recorded, down to the instruments used and the people who played them, featuring hundreds of vivid photographs that celebrate one of music's most visually arresting performers. For a list of all the newest and upcoming Books on Rock releases, just head over to our website, bookedonrock.com. Let's talk about the Rolls-Royce Phantom 5. One of only 517 cars of this model made. This may be the coolest vehicle in rock history. David, can you give the story behind this car and what's not just on the outside, but on the inside?
It's one of the funny things because John was a terrible driver. Okay, he was never good with cars and famously had a crash when he was over in the UK. He was driving up to Scotland. He had Julian with him, and Yoko had her daughter Kyoko, and they were driving in Scotland and they crashed. So he was quite late to taking his test, and he was not a good driver. But, of course, they were making so much money that they were buying these big cars. And, of course, the obvious ones to go for, if you've got the money, is you buy a Rolls-Royce. That is the ultimate symbol of power, influence, and money, is to buy a Rolls-Royce. So you get the Rolls-Royce, but John didn't just want any old Rolls-Royce. And again, it's that same idea. And I think this is, again, where John being at art college, but not liking art college. In the end, he never finished his courses. He never studied the history because, again, they tried to restrict him too much. Is to be expressive, and now they could do it. So, like with the boutique, he wanted the car to have a psychedelic painting all over it. And, it's a gorgeous thing. It's lovely yellow, then all those psychedelic colours. And there's a few people. There's one guy up here in Liverpool who has recreated that and does Beatles tours in an old Rolls-Royce, painted in exactly the same style as John's one.
That's awesome.
So
have you gone to check it out?
Well, no, because that's the rivals. Because I'm a tour guide as well.
Are you really?
So I can, yeah. So I give Beatles tours around Liverpool as well as. I mean, that's how it started with the writing the books. Was researching for doing tours. So I've been doing Beatles tours for many years as well. So in the end, I wrote the book. My first one, Liverpool. The back section of that is a tour guide. So most of the Beatles tour guides in Liverpool use my book to conduct their tours. That's
an honor.
So it is. It is. Just I wish they pay me for it. That would be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
There's a thought.
Have them go out and buy your books then, at least.
Yes, exactly.
So there's a replica car right now. A replica car?
So there's a replica car.
Okay.
No, you're talking about the car itself.
Where is that today? That's what I want to know. Where's that original car right now?
That one has been through auctions 2 or 3 times where it's been up for sale. I'm not quite sure who's got it now. You sort of lose track because every now and again one of the Beatles cars comes up, and it's one of the most famous cars ever. But it was, I mean, as well as having the outside personalised, John's like everybody else was getting. You could personalise the inside as however you wanted it. Standard stuff like your leather seats, wooden trim, cocktail cabinet, all that kind of stuff. John, he was one of those, he always had to have noise around him. Just things like when he'd be at home, there would always be at least one television set on all the time. But he'd have radios on. He loved having just noise around him, media around him all the time. He was fascinated with it. And of course, I think the thing, which we're used to having mobile phones these days, but I can remember when I was in work and it's somewhere early 90s, I got a car phone, right? And this, for me, was the height of technology. But back then, like with John's Rolls, you could have your telephone in the car.
1964, 65, we're talking. Yeah, long time.
Exactly. This is 30 years before I'm being amazed by having a phone in my car. This was the kind of thing, because they had more money than they knew what to do with, and nobody wants to give it all away to the taxman. So that they were spending money on all kinds of stuff. And you could just do whatever you wanted. And you could sometimes you spend as much on modifying the car than you would on buying the car, because that's what you could do. And it would certainly stand out.
Money to burn, as they say. It has the floating record player so that records wouldn't jump. And the double bed. Right. We can't forget that.
But I mean, the whole idea of having a record player that wouldn't jump, I mean, I don't know what the roads are like where you are, but our roads are permanently full of potholes. And I don't care how floating the record player would be. One thud, that's going to jump. Even a CD would jump.
It doesn't float enough.
No, it doesn't. But again, that's just having to have noise, music, speed, anything like that. John always had to be surrounded by all of this noise.
Well, we got to go to Bill now because Bill got to drive this car. So, Bill, what was it like driving the Rolls-Royce Phantom 5?
Absolutely fantastic, because I wanted to photograph it. I wanted John with it, and he wasn't available. And when I turned up, I started to take some pictures, and I said, "Well, you said you better drive it where you want to park it." So I got in it and I drove it across the field, down the lane. It was magic. It was just beautiful. But at the time, I was used to that sort of car because I had a Bentley myself. I had an S1 Bentley. So when I got in it, it was like I knew everything, all the controls, the lot. It was just magic.
Now we get to, Bill, your photos of the Beatles' Yellow Submarine film promotion. This was the Photoshoot in 1968. John absent that day, so this gave you a chance to take some photos of Paul, Ringo, and George. What was it like working with those three guys?
Obviously I worked with them. Mainly, most of it was on fresh releases and fresh views. But I found they was all very friendly, and they would almost do what you would ask them to do. And if you notice that there was some of them cuddling, holding the book, and what I did, if I went on a press do, I'll take what everyone's taking, of course. But I'd also say, stop, special picture for me. And I would ask them, and they would do it, which is the way to do it. You know, I didn't consider I was a press photographer. I think I was a photographer of people. That's why I've got some good shots, more so than most people.
As far as John not being there, there's the photo you take of, there's a drawing of John behind Paul, Ringo, and George. Were the guys disappointed that John wasn't actually there?
Everyone was disappointed. John Lennon didn't turn up to his reception. We had this idea we'd have a portrait done here on a card. So that's how the portrait on the card, we all put our little bit to it. I didn't do it all myself, but I helped. And it was just, it made the picture. It made the picture with John Lennon. He was still there. You know, he was there in spirit.
And how about that one with the blue meanie next to Ringo, or kind of behind Ringo? And Ringo just looks like, I really don't want to be standing here with this strange-looking fella. Do you remember that one?
Well, I think because as a group they were quite famous, they didn't need to be there. But I think it was in their contract. They did a press release and so forth. So they was there. But they was never hung around. They was always there, get a picture over and done with, and they always disappeared. They'd never stand around and talk.
I'm a big fan of George Harrison. He is an interesting guy. He had that reputation of being the most serious of the Beatles, but you've got some great photos of him with a big smile. What was George like?
That was a special time because I was asked by a music paper if I would do the pictures. He was launching, I can't remember his name now. He was launching somebody. And what surprised me, when they said, "Would you like to drink?" he said, "I'll have a cup of tea." And we was all amazed. Of course, you know, he's stirring his cup of tea. And so I took pictures because I thought a cup of tea, it made the picture. And indeed, he was talking to an interviewer when I was taking these pictures. So I've got all the expressions of the hand expressions and so forth. And I was careful when I was taking the picture, but I didn't want to go snap, 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 because all my work, or most of it, was done on a Hasselblad, which is a RollsRoyce of cameras. So where you've got a Nikon and you've got 36 shots, a Hasselblad is only a roll of film of 12. So you always had to be careful. You know, they changed the backs and changed the film. It all took time. So you was careful. And also I was very aware that the quality is important. Not that I looked ahead to say I'm going to do a book, but a lot of people say, fantastic quality of your work. And that used to please me because I was getting the best. I was an artist as well as a photographer.
Well, fantastic is the word to describe it for sure. Jackie Lomax is the name I think you were trying to think of, right? David, you can take it from there. It was Jackie Lomax?
Yeah, Jackie Lomax was a guy from Merseyside. He was the lead singer with a Merseybeat group called The Undertakers, and he'd gone down and was signed to Apple Records, and George produced a single called Sour Milk Sea, which was really popular and produced and played on Jackie's album as well. And he's one of those guys, very, very talented guy, Jackie. Really good voice, good songwriter as well. It's one of those, it didn't quite happen for him, unfortunately. But he had a career in music. I met him a number of years ago. Sadly, he's died since. But yeah, he's one that they were starting to handpick those artists that the four Beatles wanted to produce, they wanted to work with. And so, of course, yeah, so Jackie Lomax is one that worked with George. And I know also that Bill did the photographs with Mary Hopkin, who, of course, Paul McCartney then produced. And this huge hit with Those Were the Days. And Bill did a lovely photo shoot with her as well. So this is where they were all branching out because they weren't touring, so they could do their studio work in their albums, etc. But they were trying to help other people with their careers, try and get them started, which, again, like you were saying before, was the initial idea behind Apple, was to help promote artists who maybe, for whatever reason, couldn't get through to a record company, for example. They wanted to give them a head start.
I'm always curious, to get the thoughts of Beatles historians and fans on George. For him, it must have been frustrating as you get towards this period, 67, 68, right up through the Get Back sessions. This guy was fully capable of writing a complete album's worth of songs. He was still having to take a back seat to John and Paul, and I think he handled it as well as he could. But as we know in the Get Back sessions, at one point he just says, I'm out of here. Paul felt that tension coming back from George, and Paul saying, I'm just trying to help. But I think George is like, I don't need your help anymore.
Well, of course, because when they started out and they got the first record contract back in the end of 62, George and Ringo weren't writing songs. So Paul and John signed their song publishing deal, which gave them and Brian the large majority of the shares from their portion, with George and Ringo just a little bit of a payoff. George then starts, after some encouragement, to write some songs. And I think that's one of those key things within the Get Back series, was that by the time you get into 69, George's songs are as good as those of John and Paul. As we see on Abbey Road, the last album they record together, George's contribution is equal to anything Lennon and McCartney do. And it comes up a couple of times. There's the famous bit where Paul, as you say, he's trying to tell George what he wants him to do. And Paul would do that. He's sort of the musical director in his head. He's got this idea. I want this song to sound like this. So he's telling George what he wants him to play like John and Ringo. And Paul's always said one of his failings was, because George was that little bit younger than him, he always treated George like a little brother. And he regrets that at times. Because George was as a guitarist, was a far superior guitarist to Paul. And that tension now, what didn't quite come through clearly on the Get Back thing was that, George has the walk-up. He's had a big argument with John earlier that day. And the way it's edited, Paul is telling John to shut up, and then George walks out. It was funny the way it was edited. But George had just had enough and said, right, that's it. I'm out of there. Goes home. And of course, he writes Wah Wah, one of his solo songs. He just can't be doing with any more of that Wah Wah. All that hassle, it's not worth it. But of course, they get George back in. I think what made the difference was moving the studio into the Apple offices in Savile Row. Because being in a big film studio, it sounded like a good idea, but it didn't work at all. But an interesting comment when George I think he's doing I Me Mine, maybe going through stuff, but he's saying, I've got all these songs and maybe I should just do my album of my songs. You guys do yours, and then we'll come together and do a Beatles album. Now, this is something that fans have speculated about for years. Why didn't they do that? And so because they didn't, a lot of people then will go and take all the solo albums from a particular year, pick out the best tracks and create a brand new Beatles album and see if you can get it that way. And that was the biggest frustration. John was writing loads and he does a Plastic Ono band. Paul, as soon as they split up in 70, has got his first album there. Ringo goes and does his Sentimental Journey. And of course, George comes out with the triple album. It's amazing from a guy who, in 62, had never written a song. In a matter of just a few years, is writing as well as John and Paul, and can then come out with a triple album of incredible songs. And that was the problem. How often in a group do you get three amazing songwriters who could all write, the top songs? It's so rare. It's
unheard of. I would say maybe Queen. You could maybe put Queen up there. Roger Taylor, John Deacon, Freddie, and Brian May had, each of the four had a number one single on one chart or the other. But even that, and even those guys wouldn't say, hey, we can't touch these three. Yeah, to think that was actually a problem. I mean, what a problem to have. But yeah, you said that the editing of that scene when George walks out was cut up a little bit in a way it's not completely accurate.
Yeah, it was strange the way it happened. There'd been an argument in the morning between George and John and Yoko. It was innocuous. There was nothing much to it. But they just had, I think because George in particular was so tense and really getting frustrated with everything going on, they just had a bit of a shouting match, George and John. George was getting fed up with the way Paul was telling him what to do. And the way it came out, and that's because the argument wasn't filmed or recorded audio or anything. So you can't actually put it into a film. There was nothing you could put in, because you would then need somebody to come in and comment on it. And of course, there's no narration to it, which again, it's genius to do that long a series with no narrative, no voiceover at any stage. So it just jarred a little bit. And I don't think it quite captured really the frustrations, but we don't know what other material they've got. But we know there's enough around, for George to have said that, look, Paul, you tell me what you want me to play. I'll play it, or I won't play at all, whatever you want.
Did you know there was a microphone in that plant? That's fascinating. That conversation, we're talking about, for those who haven't seen it, it's John and Paul. They get together to discuss the band issues. Neither of them knew there was a microphone inserted into the plant, which was on the table where they were sitting.
This is one that I've got so many questions about. Why would anybody think to put a microphone in the canteen on the off chance that there'd be a discussion? Now, I know that there's so much more audio than video. It's only like about 150 hours or something of audio. But yeah, I got so many questions about this microphone in the plant pot or whatever it was they were saying in the canteen. Yeah, never come across that before. And that's Paul and John supposedly trying to have a quiet chat. What do we do? And it leads up to one of the most poignant moments, which, full credit to Michael Lindsay Hogg, who directed it, was the morning after George had walked out, and then John doesn't turn up, and they're saying, is John going to come in? And Paul just says, and then there were two. And you see his eyes are welling up, and he's thinking, this is it. This is the end of the band. And I think, to be fair to Paul, I think more than anything, he was the one trying to keep the Beatles together.
I noticed that too.
After Brian.
I noticed that too.
And that was what a moment. But yeah, I've got so many questions about that microphone in the canteen. Who would have thought that's a good idea? That's strange. Very strange.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. Bill, I want to go to the photos that you took of John and Yoko, which were the last before John and Yoko went to America. These photos from 1970. David, if you could just set up this scene here before we go to Bill and talk to him and ask him about that.
For me, I think these are some of the most amazing photos that I'd ever seen of John and Yoko. And they've been talked about so much. Yoko broke up the Beatles. I think maybe the Get Back series has resolved that one. And it's like, no. She was there. She was hardly ever involved in anything. She was often trying to calm John down and stuff. So Yoko didn't break up the Beatles like that. Of course, they've got together, and they both have this creative spark in them, which I don't think anybody else ever understood. I think they're the only two people who understood each other. And they lived in their little world that they'd created. And of course, they'd done Plastic Ono Band, and they'd done obviously they'd got married, they did their Bed In for Peace, and they'd done that in Amsterdam, they'd done that over in Montreal. They were off doing a completely different thing. They were doing their art events. But I think when they're getting ready to head off to New York, and of course, John doesn't think that's going to be the last time he's ever in England, because with all the green card stuff that follows, he can never come back. But the photos of the two of them together, I think if anybody ever wants to know, were John and Yoko in love, is look at Bill's photos there, because you cannot act like that. The look between the two of them, I think they're just spectacular photographs. They really are. And as Bill was saying, they allowed them to take a few, and then John said, okay, that's enough. And when the camera stopped, they didn't stop cuddling. There was just no more photos. It wasn't posed. It was natural. And I think you can see there that they loved each other.
My mother is a professional handwriting analyst and has been for many years, since the early 60s. So she's working on a project on John and Yoko, and she was asked to get the signatures and writing samples of John and Yoko. She said to me last night, she says, I'm done with it. Do you want to hear what I came up with? And it was really interesting
Ooh.
about John, right? She says, John and Yoko's handwriting, it's like it's the same person. Like they were the same people. They were so perfectly matched.
They were so in tune with each other. And I think
Fascinating,
that's
right?
what...
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think once they'd met and they clicked, nobody else truly understood them. But they got each other where as you say, yeah, that they just became this one being.
Yeah.
Everything they did, they never wanted to be apart.
So, Bill, what do you remember about this? I'm looking at this great photo here titled Top of the Pops, February 11th, 1970. What do you remember about this?
I mean, I was proud when they did the only Top of the Pops, the Yoko Ono band, that I was the only photographer they wanted there. I spent probably 3 hours with them in the studio doing what I wanted to do. And until towards the end, they was watching the rushes, and I lifted my camera because him and Yoko were cuddling. And I thought, that's a good shot. So I took this picture, and he turned around and I went like this, no more.
He waved you away.
Because I didn't feel they wanted to be photographed with her for some reason. So I didn't take any more. I had what I wanted. I knew that the newspapers would use it. And I think one of the Sunday papers used it on the following Sunday. And I think Musical Express, or one of the music papers, they also used it. But so it was quite good. But since then, that picture has been published so many times. Every month, I get through my agent, I get a little statement: John Lennon and Yoko, John Lennon and Yoko, John Lennon and Yoko. So that day paid off. It made a lot of money, but it was okay. Time they was recording, but what made me feel it wasn't all good is when I took a picture, the last picture of them, where John was putting his arm around her, and he went, no. So I stopped taking pictures because he didn't want any intimate pictures with her. And I thought, well, that's strange. You're an item. Surely there must be something wrong.
Interesting. So at that time, there was something wrong between the two of them. I'm trying to remember, David, when was the Lost Weekend? Yeah. When did that take place?
That was I just about 73, 74 time when he was in New York and he and Yoko had split. Okay. John is then with May Pang and they end up down in LA. John hooks up with Harry Nilsson and was doing a lot of drinking and a lot of stuff.
So Bill's saying there may have been something going on between John and Yoko at that time, maybe a little bit. As much as they loved each other, they might have been going through something at that point.
They had, because they'd had drug problems. They got onto heroin and stuff, which messes with you big time. And then in 1970, John had done his primal therapy. The two of them did this primal screaming therapy that Arthur Janov had developed, which was really trying to get back to childhood. Because John said by mid-60s, everything that had happened to him bottled up so much that he couldn't feel. You know, he was numb. He had all the money he wanted, all the women he wanted, everything he could ever want. And he had no contentment at all. When he wrote Help, and it came out, this upbeat pop song, but he wrote that quite slow. And if you read the lyrics to that, help me if you can, I'm feeling down. He was aching back to when I was younger, so much younger than today. I never needed anybody. He was trapped within the Beatles, and he tried everything to deal with that, whether it be alcohol, soft drugs, hard drugs, whatever. And it wasn't until he did that primal therapy that he was then getting in touch with feelings and memories going back to the trauma of childhood, which is what we did with that Looking for Lennon film, of looking at all those points of trauma. So the two of them were going through some strange times, family-wise as well, because both of them were then divorced. They had children with a former partner. They were coming together. They were then doing some of these drugs. They were doing the therapy. The Beatles are splitting up. They're starting up with Plastic Ono Band. moving to New York. There was so much going on, and everything was in the glare of publicity. You couldn't escape, which is one of the reasons why John loved being in New York, is because, in a way, because there were so many celebrities there, you could wander around and not really be disturbed. You couldn't do that in Britain. And I think he needed to escape.
One of the celebrities living in New York at that time was James Taylor, and you may have already heard this story. I just heard it. He was on Howard Stern talking about Mark David Chapman. December 7th, 1980, the day before John is killed, he was right next to Mark David Chapman. They both got off the subway, and there's Mark David Chapman right next to James Taylor. He said, okay.
No. Wow.
He said Chapman was just babbling away, a lot of crazy talk, even brought up John. How can I find John? I have to give him something. And James Taylor said, I knew that this guy, I got a bad vibe from him. I tried to just shoo him away and say, okay, thanks, nice talking to you, take care, and walked away. And then the next day, James Taylor, I don't know if he lived in the same building, but the window was open. He was on the phone, and he was talking to his friend about how dangerous New York City can be, and there's always police around. You can always hear the police cars and sirens and gunshots. 5 gunshots go off. And he says, oh, hear that? He goes, that's 5 shots. Another police officer just emptied out their gun. He said, that turns out that was when John was being shot. Those are the gunshots.
Oh, my goodness.
Insane.
Wow.
Insane. I want to ask you, Bill, what went through your mind when you heard the news that John had been killed?
Well, a great sadness, because I couldn't understand anyone doing it, because the guy who did it, he was obviously not right in the head, and I felt that guy did it for attention. That's how I felt. But John Lennon was a wonder of this world, to me. He was one of the best artists that, I've seen.
There'll never be another one like him. Well, on a lighter side, I want to ask you, Bill, about these bouncing ball photos. These are fun to look at. I love the one of the guy on the bridge. These are just random folks mostly. You did get a shot of Robin Gibb on the ball during a Bee Gees shoot, but you took a bouncing ball wherever you went. What sparked that idea?
I think it was a guy who invented the bouncing ball. Was his name Tozer? I think it was. And I saw, and I thought, God, I want to get everybody on it, but you make a good picture spread. When I was taking pictures, I didn't look at it as one picture. You always went for a spread of pictures. So to get everybody on the bouncing ball, I had to do it. And I approached them, they gave me a bouncing ball, and I took it everywhere. Anyone who could bounce on that ball, I would photograph them. But the guy on the bridge, he was a great friend of mine, and he still is. He's still alive. He's 90. I remember that moment like yesterday because it was fun. And anything like that, you had to do it in a place of note. So bouncing across Westminster Bridge is important. So it always makes newspaper.
I was going to ask you about that particular photo of your friend there. He's got the newspaper under his arm. He's got the hat on, the umbrella. Looks like a sunny day. He's got a big smile on his face. Have you ever been approached about a band wanting to use that for an album cover? It's a perfect album cover. It's like a Pink Floyd album cover.
Yeah, I was thinking Floyd as well.
Right.
I mean, obviously I've done album covers, but I don't know. It's a good question, but no, I've never been approached about doing album covers with a bouncing ball. No.
Let's talk about the Marianne Faithful photos in this book. David, Marianne's name is often mentioned when looking back on rock history. Can you give us a brief backstory on her and how she's a part of classic rock history before we ask Bill about those photos?
Yeah, she's one of those most famous names from the 60s. Part of it is, as well as being an artist in her own right, she was famously one of the girlfriends of Mick Jagger. She was always seen around society. So it's no surprise that Bill got to photograph her. And of course, she was an actress as well. And that's the session that Bill was photographing. Again, some fantastic photos on the film set. So she had a number of hit records. She was, again, one of those people associated with swinging London in the swinging 60s. You know, her name was always there. And I know she'd only recently had been a documentary on where she spoke at length about her career. Fascinating subject. And of course, you know, she was one of those who was very photogenic and would, you know, to get photographed by absolutely everybody. But Bill's photos, again, they stand out. It's like we say with almost everything that he did. It's not just here's a person, snap a picture and that's it. They're all beautifully framed, and they're doing this on the film set. And of course, say photogenic, beautiful lady. And I think his pictures are just fabulous. I love looking at those ones. Really, really good.
She looks beautiful in these photos. This is 1968, a film called Girl on a Motorcycle. Bill, you said Marianne Faithful was quite distant, but very nice. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, it was obviously on the film set, and I had a limited amount of time to do pictures. She was on the motorbike in the film, obviously, and she wasn't actually on the motorbike. She was on a trolley with a motorbike on, which was going along. But Marianne Faithful, she's very hard, I found, to communicate with. It's just one of those people. But saying that, she still came over as a nice person.
Marc Bolan of T-Rex. Bill took photos of him. It was after a car accident he was in, and only a few months before he was sadly killed in another car crash. John and Paul were big fans of T-Rex. David, you were a fan as well?
Well, I can remember, this is the music that I started to remember as a kid was in the 70s. And, you know, you're still hearing songs like Get It On. You know, he started off what really became glam rock. The band had formed in the 60s as the full Tyrannosaurus Rex, and then shortens to T-Rex. He had so many hit singles, a new sound, a new look. You know, here was Marc Bolan with the long hair, and then wearing, you know, facial makeup and glam without trying to look female. But that started this glam rock that happened right the way through the 70s, and he was a huge star, particularly in Britain. And it was a new sound, some very distinctive, really clever songs as well. And he's another of those who got taken too young with a car accident. And again, he'd got to know Bill. And Bill had taken the photos. And I love the photo, which is just him standing there, you know, his hair blown in the wind. I think it's a fabulous, fabulous photos. And then you turn the page and you're looking at him there with the black eye, with the bruises, and looking injured. And he actually wanted to be photographed like that.
Only 29 years old when he died. Bill, what was your impression of Marc Bolan from the time that you were taking photos of him?
I found him very sad. He came to my studio, so I could do a picture of him, I think, because he had a crash. And he came to the studio, and I photographed him as a result of the crash, so he could show to the insurance company. But he was very sad. You know, he wasn't, I don't know, I wasn't surprised that he ended his life so quickly. He was just a sad man, really.
In 1976, you took photos of Rod Stewart with his girlfriend, Britt Eklund. Her and Rod attracted quite a bit of attention from the press. You were at the airport where they had returned from Sweden. And, Bill, you were able to get a quick shot of the two together?
Well, they were in the news. They got together. And someone said to me, they arrived at London airport, coming back from Sweden, and would you like to get a picture? So I went down to London airport, and when they came in, I got a picture. But they didn't want it done because there's been so much in the news about them getting together. They didn't really want it done, but I managed to they did pose for one, and that was it. You know, and I think it's one of the only ones about, really.
Well, let's move on to the Rolling Stones photos. These are wild. The band members wearing some interesting outfits, including Brian Jones. David, can you set up this scene when and where these photos are taken?
Yeah, it's one of those interesting things when I was talking to Bill, because, of course, the two biggest British groups at the time were the Beatles and the Stones. And yet, these are really the only couple of photos of the Rolling Stones that Bill had. And he explained that there was like an agreement amongst the photographers of not crossing over. it's different now where it's a free for all. So he only ever took a couple of photos of the Stones. And as you say, the clothes they're wearing, you do wonder what they were on at the time. It's like,
wild.
Like the clothes don't match. They're so strange.
What can we explain what the heck that is on Brian's pants, like going down the middle of his pants? No, it's on his right leg, and it looks like
that's it. It's only on his right leg. Yeah, if you look at his left hand, then he's carrying a bottle, which you would probably guess is vodka.
Yeah.
You can see that.
And then the right leg, it's like this big swirly design that goes all the way down the right leg, and this big loud red tie and sparkles all over his suit.
And the sparkles go down the left leg, and the black stripes go down the right leg. His hair's all over the place. I mean,
boy, look at his face.
Look at the face.
Yeah, he looks like he is completely
wasted.
out of it. Completely out of it. Yeah.
And that was the problem. So, they got the pose photo with all the Stones, and then obviously with Brian Jones walking there, but he doesn't look with it at all. He really doesn't.
And Bill, you say it was a free-for-all press appearance. Can you expand on that some more?
Well, the Rolling Stones, first of all, they had their own favourite photographer. I don't know his name, but they had that. And then they come for a press reception, and the press people wanted them to do a certain thing. They didn't want to do it. But I sort of snatched a few pictures beforehand. So, no, it's only me who got the pictures. If I could say something else that just come to mind.
Please do, absolutely.
I used to get ideas, and I used to take pictures I could sell to newspapers. Because I know I didn't have to do the story. I do the picture, and the newspapers would get their reporters to build a story around it. So quite often, though I knew they were famous and so forth, I didn't know too much about the background of the stars. I wasn't a writer, I admit that, but I was a photographer and an artist, and if I got good pictures, they would sell because people wanted to write about them.
Yeah, they see a great picture and there's their story idea. They just write it around your amazing photos, which leads to my next question. Perfect segue. Talk about a picture that inspires a story. I can't go without asking you, Bill, about the photos you took on Westminster Bridge. You write, I am standing on Westminster Bridge with two naked girls and a camera. What's the story behind these photos of two nude women streaking?
Well, there's a story to that, yes. At the time, people were going naked on Brighton Beach, and it was making news. So I was on the train one morning going into London. I had this idea. I'll get two girls to streak across Westminster Bridge. I got in the office at 9 o'clock. 9:30, I phoned a model agency and I said, I need two girls to streak across Westminster Bridge for me. Do you have any? Of course, they said, how much would we pay them? So I said, £25 each. I said, okay. And then when they come to my office, they stripped off and just put overcoats on. And I drove them to Westminster Bridge. I parked on the side of the bridge and I lined up the shot. And I said to them, now, when you get to the brow of the bridge, come back. They got out. I took pictures of them running across the bridge, but they didn't stop because there was no brow to them. As they run, it was all flat. So I had to run after them. I held on to my camera, other cameras in the car. I shut the car door and I ran after them. We crossed the road and I took some more pictures of them coming back. Anyway, when we got back to the car, which was illegally parked on Westminster Bridge, I blocked us out. What did I do? So I had to break the window to get my keys to open the car. And that's the story behind that. But it was all down to that people going nude on Brighton Beach. I just thought we'd do it in London. But it turned out to be a very famous picture that year. You know, it was always being talked about. And it did me a lot of good because it got my name up there. You know, it was good. Yep. I also did a 3 topped of girls in Trafalgar Square fountain. And, of course, the police come along and we was all arrested. And we went into Bow Street the next day to the court. A policeman come up to me, who's in charge of it all, and he said, "If you give me a picture, I'll drop the charges against you."
Of course.
Anyway, the three girls were fined £25 each, and I paid the bill, but it was worth it, you know. And I signed a picture of the three girls from the policeman.
Streaking was a big thing in the early 70s. This is around 1970, 71, is it maybe?
Yeah, it was early 70s, but we had all the big sporting events, cricket matches, football matches. At some point during the game, there'd just be this naked lady would run on and go streaking. And then men did it as well. It was, for some reason, it just became the thing to do.
Well, Bill, I want to finish up by asking you about some of your work in the 80s, specifically Status Quo. You were a friend of the band's singer, Rick Parfitt. Can you talk about your relationship with him and taking photos of Status Quo?
There's quite a story about them, because I was the only one who did a lot of pictures. But Rick Parfitt became a special friend. And one day he phoned me up, and it's when his daughter died in the swimming pool, got drowned. And he phoned me up and he said, "Will you come to my house and photograph her bedroom for me?" And I went there because it upset him, because I think he freaked out for about 3 months over his daughter dying. Anyway, I went and photographed the bedroom, all her toys and everything. And then after that, I rang up. I said, "Well, I've developed them. They're all okay. What do you want me to do with them?" He said, "I don't want you to do anything with them. I want you to hold them for me and look after them." 7 years later, I get this call from him saying, "Bill, have you still got the pictures?" I said, "Of course I have." He said, "Well, would you give them to Woman's Own, because they're doing an article on it?" And which I did. So I gave the negatives and everything to Woman's Own to do the article. And that's the story there. It follows there. I didn't realise, we live in Spain, as you know. He lived down the road and I didn't know.
Marbella, Spain.
Yeah, I only found out, but I heard when he died, because he was doing a concert over here. And I said, "I'm going to surprise him. I'm going to go along." And the concert cancelled him because he died. When I found he lived down the road about 5 kilometres, 6 kilometres away, I was very upset. I didn't know, because we got on very well together.
Yeah, it was Christmas Eve of 2016 he passed away. He was 68.
Yeah.
Wow. And Rick was one of the main guys in the band.
Him and Francis Rossi were the two main guys, both singers, both songwriters. And it was a sad one, because it's a band that I'd followed from when I was a kid all the way through. And they were finishing. They decided that was going to be the end of Status Quo. Last time they were going to do a tour, and the last date was Liverpool. And so, because I got tickets with a friend of mine, and Rick had fallen ill at the beginning of that week and couldn't make the show. So one of the other guys, Andy Bound, who plays keyboards as well, played guitar as well. And it was the following day that Rick died. So it was the day after we'd seen the last concert of Status Quo, which was here in Liverpool. And the following day, Rick died. And, he was one of my heroes, and the fact that Bill had got to know him as well. It's another one of those wonderful things about doing this book with Bill, is that so many of these groups, it's not just with the Beatles, Madness, favourite band, Status Quo, favourite band. There was so much we had in common, so much that we could talk about. And I think my favourite photo in the book is the one of Status Quo where, see if we can get Bill to describe it, Status Quo about to go off on tour, and they're in this huge arena and all the equipment is lined up, ready to go. And it's just a phenomenal photograph with all the roadies, all the gear, the vehicles, and then the 4 guys from the band at the very, very front.
Bill, what do you remember about this shoot?
That was a special day because they hired the Bourbon Exhibition Centre for me to do that picture. And it was a picture for their record cover. And it was magic because it was frightening. I mean, it took all morning just to arrange everything and get everything into the arena. And I'm thinking, I need an aerial shot. And I looked round, there was no ladders or lifts or anything could get me up there. So what I did, I climbed along the rafters, walked along the rafters to the NEC and did that photograph. I always remember because I nearly slipped off once. But, you know, it was just a magic. I've got the picture. That was the main thing. But they used that for their record cover and their promotions and everything. It was quite a special picture, really.
Well, it's one of many, many amazing photos in this book, and we really just only scratched the surface. There are photos. I just focused on the rock photos here just because, you know, this podcast is specific to rock music, but there's so much more in here. You got Hollywood stars and just there's a bunch of amazing photos. So, David, where can fans get a copy of this book?
Well, you can go to the website we've created, which is billzygmant.com. So BILLZYGMANT.com. That has a few of the photos there. You can look at some of Bill's story, and then you can order that. And at the moment, we've got a limited edition hardback cover. We're only doing 250 of those, and they've already started selling really, really well. So, and with that, we're including a signed photo, one of the ones of John and Yoko together that Bill has signed, which is almost worth it as much as the book itself. And that's included free just in the limited edition. So get that as soon as you can.
And any social media pages that either both of you want to get out there for people to reach you?
Yeah, get in touch with mine. Just at the name of my first book, which is Liddypool, LIDDYPOOL, Liddypool. The website, liddypool.com, or Liddypool on Facebook. You can also find us at the Beatles bookstore as well. So BeatlesBookstore.com. So there's lots of ways to pick up on what we're doing. But if you go to the BillZygmant.com, that'll give you links to find everything from there.
Guys, thanks so much. Congratulations on the book. And it was great talking about the amazing career of Bill Zygmant. Thanks, guys.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having us on.
Thanks to Bill Zygmant and David Bedford for taking us through their book, Where Did You Get That Shirt? If you have a local independent bookstore, pick up a copy there and support not just Bill and David, but your local independent bookstore. A link to find your nearest bookstore on our website, bookedonrock.com. Be sure to subscribe to Booked on Rock at Spreaker or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. We're on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, TuneIn, YouTube, and more. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/BookedOnRockPodcast. On Twitter at BookedOnRock. The email address, thebookedonrockpodcast@gmail.com. I'm Eric Senich. Thanks for listening, and join me again next time for another episode of Booked on Rock.